Ready for a deep dive into something that might just turn your thinking upside down? We're talking about Steven Johnson's Everything Bad is Good for You.
Oh yeah, this one's a fun one. It's basically Johnson saying, hey, all that pop culture we love, the TV shows, the video games, it might not be so bad for our brains after all. In fact, he argues it could be making us smarter.
That's a bold claim. Most of us have probably heard the opposite, that too much TV or video games turns your brain to mush. So how does he back that up?
Well, he starts with this concept he calls the sleeper curve. Imagine, right, a graph where, at first glance, the smartness of our entertainment is either flatlining or even going down.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So what's the sleeper part?
The sleeper part is that, according to Johnson, there's this hidden upward curve, almost like, it's sneaking up on us. Like those sleeper agents, things aren't always what they seem.
I like it. It's like our brains are secretly getting a workout while we're busy being entertained.
Exactly. And he gives this great example, something most wouldn't think of as smart entertainment. Those old school tabletop games like APBA baseball.
Oh, yeah, with the dice rolls and stats and all that. I remember those.
Johnson was obsessed with it as a kid. And he says, figuring it all out, all those rules and strategies, it was like learning another language.
So it seemed simple on the surface, but actually mastering it required this whole other level of thinking.
Precisely. What we perceive as simple entertainment often has hidden layers of complexity. It's like mental weightlifting in disguise.
Okay, so if board games can be secretly good for us, what about something like television? For years, it's been public enemy number one when it comes to rotting our brains.
And Johnson goes right for that assumption. He says, hold on, TV's not the intellectual wasteland everyone thinks it is. In fact, he argues it's gotten more intellectually demanding over time.
Okay, now I'm really curious. You're going to have to explain this one because with all the reality TV and those endless cooking competitions, I'm not so sure I see it.
Think about it. Remember the days of those laugh track sitcoms? Those are fading away, right? Now we're in the era of shows like ER, The West Wing, Survivor. These aren't just entertainment, they're puzzles.
I'll give you that. Those shows definitely require more attention than just passively watching.
Exactly. They keep you on your toes.
So no more just zoning out in front of the TV. You actually got to engage with what you're watching.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see his point. But what about reality TV? Those guilty pleasures. I bet even you can't spin those as brain food.
All right, you got me there. They might not be high art, but Johnson argues that they tap into something else. Think about shows like Survivor or The Apprentice. They're like social experiments, games even.
Okay, I can kind of see that. You're watching people strategize, make alliances, try to outwit each other.
Exactly. We get sucked into the drama, but we're also analyzing their every move, trying to predict who's going to come out on top. We're engaging with all these complex social dynamics, even if it's just about who gets voted off the island.
It's true. I've had some pretty intense debates with friends about those shows. Never thought I'd be calling them intellectually stimulating, but maybe Johnson's onto something.
Right. It's like we're all armchair psychologists trying to figure out what makes these people tick. But here's the thing. This is all anecdotal, right? So does Johnson have any hard evidence to support this idea that our brains are actually getting sharper?
That's what I was wondering. It's a compelling argument, but is there more to it than that?
This is where it gets even more interesting. Johnson brings in something called the Flynn effect. Have you heard of it?
Okay, now you've really got my attention. What's the Flynn effect, and what does it have to do with reality TV?
So imagine IQ scores are like a measure of our mental fitness, right? The Flynn effect basically says that humanity's mental fitness has been getting better and better for the past 100 years.
Really? Like, we're getting smarter as a species?
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. But if it's not because of school, what's causing it?
Well, Johnson thinks it might be all this complex media we're consuming. It's like our brains are constantly being challenged, forced to adapt to all this new information.
So you're saying that watching a show like West Wing or playing a complex video game is actually giving our brains a workout, even if we don't realize it?
Exactly. It's not just about memorizing facts anymore. It's about problem solving, thinking critically, making connections. It's like our brains are becoming more agile, more adaptable.
That makes sense. The world is a lot more complex than it used to be, and maybe our brains are just keeping up.
Right. And maybe, just maybe, it's changing how we define intelligence itself. It's not just about what you know anymore, it's about how you think, how you adapt.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, if we're getting smarter from all this media consumption, then why are people reading less? Isn't reading supposed to be the best thing for your brain?
That's the common assumption, right? But Johnson doesn't necessarily agree. He says it's more complicated than that. Sure, people might not be reading as many novels as they used to, but we're still swimming in text.
We
Think about it. Every day we're reading emails, articles, social media posts. It's a different type of reading, for sure, but it's still reading.
So it's not that we're reading less, it's that the way we're reading has changed.
Exactly. We're skimming, scanning, clicking on hyperlinks, constantly bombarded with information from all sides. It's like our brains have adapted to this constant influx of data.
It's true. I know I've definitely fallen into that trap of skimming and jumping from one thing to the next online. Sometimes I worry that I've lost the ability to focus on one thing for an extended period.
And that's Johnson's point. He wonders if we're sacrificing depth for breadth, Like, are we losing the ability to really engage with a complex text, to grapple with challenging ideas in a long-form format?
It's a scary thought. Have we become so accustomed to instant gratification, to getting our information in bite-sized chunks, that we can no longer appreciate the slow burn of a good book?
It's a valid question, and one that Johnson doesn't shy away from. He's not saying it's a good or bad thing necessarily, but it's definitely something to think about.
Okay, before we spiral into an existential crisis about the death of reading, let's get back to Johnson's argument about popular culture. Because I have a bit of a bone to pick with this whole everything bad is good for you idea. What about all the negativity we're bombarded with? The violence, the drama, the constant stream of bad news. That can't be good for our brains, can it?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And it's a fair one, but Johnson throws a bit of a curveball when he addresses this.
Oh, I do love a good curveball. What does he say?
He points out that, statistically speaking, the rise of so-called violent media, things like video games and action movies, has actually coincided with a decrease in real-world violence.
Wait, really? So you're telling me that playing Grand Theft Auto makes you less likely to steal a car in real life?
It's not that simple, of course. Correlation doesn't equal causation, and we certainly don't want to downplay the very real harm that violence can inflict.
Of course not.
But it does make you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. So what's Johnson's take? What's going on here?
Well, he suggests that maybe, just maybe, these forms of entertainment provide a sort of outlet for those darker impulses we all have. A way to explore our fascination with violence and conflict in a safe, controlled environment.
Like a virtual catharsis.
Exactly. It's not that these games or movies are making us less violent, but they might be giving us a way to process those feelings, to work through them without actually harming anyone.
That's an interesting theory. But I'm sure it's a controversial one.
Oh, absolutely. And Johnson acknowledges that. He's not saying that media has no influence on our behavior, but it's not a simple cause and effect relationship either.
Right, it's never that simple.
Exactly. There are so many other factors at play, social, economic, environmental, that shape who we are and how we behave. It's a complex issue, and Johnson's just trying to get us to think about it in a more nuanced way.
I appreciate that. Okay, so we've talked about TV, reality TV, even the potential impact of violent media.
Yeah.
But what about video games? That seems like the final frontier when it comes to the everything bad is good for you argument. Surely Johnson doesn't believe that spending hours in front of a screen, controller in hand, is good for you.
You'd be surprised. In fact, Johnson argues that video games might be the ultimate example of the sleeper curve in action.
Okay, I'm listening. Convince me.
Think about it. Video games, even more so than TV or movies, demand active engagement. You're not just passively consuming, you're problem-solving, strategizing, thinking critically.
I mean, I guess that's true, but are you saying that playing Call of Duty is like a workout for your brain?
It can be. You're exercising your spatial reasoning, your hand-eye coordination, your ability to think on your feet. And in multiplayer games, you're also developing your social intelligence, learning how to cooperate and compete with others in a virtual environment.
So it's not just about twitch reflexes and memorizing button combinations. There's actually some cognitive benefit happening beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And often that learning happens unconsciously as a side effect of the gameplay. Johnson tells this great anecdote about his nephew playing SimCity. Remember that game?
Oh, yeah. You're the mayor of this virtual city, right?
Yeah.
And you have to build it up and manage all its resources.
Exactly. So Johnson's nephew is playing this game, totally engrossed, when he turns to him and makes this incredibly insightful comment about, wait for it, tax policy.
No way. The kid playing SimCity is dropping knowledge about tax policy. That doesn't sound like your average video game conversation.
I know, right? And that, for Johnson, is the perfect illustration of the hidden potential of these games. They can be incredibly powerful tools for learning, even if that learning isn't always overt or intentional.
So it's not about the content of the game itself, but the skills that you're developing while you're playing.
Exactly. You're immersed in this complex system, you're making decisions that have real consequences, you're experimenting and adapting in real time. It's a form of experiential learning that traditional education often struggles to replicate.
So instead of memorizing facts from a textbook, you're learning by doing, by making mistakes and trying again. It's like that old saying, experience is the best teacher.
Exactly. And what's even cooler is that those skills, the problem solving, the resource management, even the social skills you develop in multiplayer games, they can actually be applied to real world situations.
It's like we're training for the future without even realizing it. But speaking of the future, with all this talk about TV, games, and how our brains are adapting, we can't ignore the element in the room to the internet. It's this massive, chaotic, sometimes scary place. And it seems like it's changing our brains too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Johnson definitely goes there. He doesn't shy away from the potential downsides of all this connectivity.
Like how much time we spend staring at screens, or how easy it is to get sucked down these rabbit holes of information overload.
Those are definitely part of it, but he also talks about something really interesting, what he calls the echo chamber effect. You familiar with that?
Yeah, it's like when you're only exposed to information and opinions that already align with your own.
Exactly. And online, it's so easy to get trapped in those echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with everything you say. It's like living in a bubble.
And those bubbles can be pretty dangerous, right? Because if you're never exposed to different perspectives, you might start to think your view is the only one that matters.
Exactly. It's like looking at the world through a pinhole instead of seeing the whole picture. And that can lead to all sorts of problems like polarization, intolerance, even extremism.
Okay, so the internet has the potential to trap us in these echo chambers, but it also has this incredible power to connect us to information and people from all over the world. So which is it? Is it good for us or bad for us?
It's both. And that's the thing about technology. It's a double-edged sword. The internet can be an incredible tool for learning, for connecting with others, for fostering empathy and understanding, but it can also be used to spread misinformation, to manipulate people, to create division and distrust.
So it all comes down to how we choose to use it.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of our online habits, about seeking out diverse perspectives, about being critical of the information we consume.
It's about taking responsibility for our own digital diets, just like we try to eat healthy and exercise regularly.
I like that.
Yeah.
Digital diets. We need to start thinking about the information we consume with the same kind of care and attention that we give to the food we eat.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Stephen Johnson's Everything Bad is Good for You, I think the big question on everyone's mind is this. Is he right? Is all this pop culture, all this technology actually making us smarter?
You know, it's a tricky question, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but I will say this. Johnson's book is a breath of fresh air because it challenges us to think differently about the world around us, to question our assumptions, and to see the potential for learning and growth in unexpected places.
It's a reminder that our brains are incredibly adaptable, constantly evolving in response to the world around us.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the things we often dismiss as frivolous or even harmful, those things might actually be playing a role in shaping us into more complex, adaptable, and yes, even smarter human beings.
It's a fascinating idea, and one that I know I'll be pondering for a long time to come. So the next time you find yourself glued to a screen, whether you're catching up on your favorite reality TV show or battling it out in a virtual world, take a moment to appreciate the hidden workout your brain is getting. And who knows, you might even learn something new along the way. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and stay curious.